Thank you, Katya. What a gracious introduction, and hearing all of that, just like flashback 25 years of life here in DC. So I moved to DC 25 years ago from Jamaica to attend Howard University, where I studied journalism. And so DC has been home. I've lived in other parts of the world, but I've only lived in DC in terms of like the US. And so it's a really special place, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to the place I've adopted as my home. So where we will spend time today, consider this to be a primer around storytelling. You're all storytellers. I heard your goals today, the stories of your names. You're already storytellers. So it's really thinking about shifting from your own personal story to telling your organization story. So in terms of our goals today, understanding organizational positioning, I will define a value proposition. We'll spend some time today developing or continuing to develop your positioning statement, and then we'll do some best practices around organizational storytelling. Agenda, a warm-up exercise. We'll share what is a positioning statement. We'll share a framework that we use, ample time for questions. So our warm-up exercise, take a couple of minutes to each share an attribute or a lived experience not visible to the naked eye that's important to who you are as a person, and then switch. And I'll start. I was adopted at 3 days old, and it really changed the course of my life. It really was transformative in the course of my life, because I know that my life trajectory would not have been what it is today without that incredible gift. So all the stories that we tell, right, like they start within us. Sometimes they're narratives that are imposed, and like you noted, right, you get to take it back, right, and reframe it and really own it in a way that's meaningful to you. And then it sometimes informs our work, right? Like, how do we then move from a place of personal passion or lived experience, and then we put that out in the world like you've all done, right, to start this movement, which I'm really excited about. Fun fact, I love being in nature. And August, who's in the right-hand side, met the president last year. He's almost 3, my son August. He decided to fist bump the president, so I thought, and Oriana, my dear colleague, worm, I love that. Glass half full, optimist, definitely. We're at home with all of you. What is positioning? And I've also referenced value proposition. So it's a clear and compelling statement that explains how your enterprise, right, how your organization, product, service benefits potential customers. There are lots of offerings out in the world. So to the point of uniquely, how are you positioned to help to solve the problem, to fix a pain point, et cetera. So in the marketing world. And then in the nonprofit sector, there's been kind of emerging work about positioning. How do we position our organization? It's one sentence, friends. Doesn't have an and, that describes the unique space that we occupy in our audience's mind. So that is our positioning statement. Really important distinction between a list of our offerings. Your value proposition is that unique statement. And then you may say, well, Kerry, how is that different from our mission or our vision or goal setting work that we've done as a team? Well, they're all related. They're all part of the same ecosystem. So your mission is why we exist. Why are we here, right? So your fundamental purpose, and there's shared purpose in the room, kind of shared passion and purpose. I love that, because we're all working towards the world that we want to realize, one that's more just, one that's more equitable, one that's more inclusive, and one that centers digital well-being for young people. So that's what connects all of us. Our vision, right, is where we're going, and collectively we could also cast a vision of what is the world that we want to see as a product of our collective effort as a group and as a movement. And then the positioning, you can see, sits in that space. What's the unique space that each of your organizations occupy? Right, so how do we get to a positioning statement? 4 C's, starting on the right-hand side: category, culture, cause, consumer. The right-hand side speaks to our internal work, right, within our organizations. So culture, what is the cultural tension that we are trying to relieve as an organization? When you look out in the world at the bevy of problems and challenges, like what are we aiming to solve for? And then consumer, what does our audience crave? When you think about, just picture from an audience perspective, the individuals that you are working in service of and working alongside, what are they craving? Right? That's the consumer. When you collapse the culture, the tension, the problem, challenge in the world that we're trying to relieve, and what our audience craves, we get to this kind of collapse of like, what's the need, right? So that's the outside world. Like then let's move into the inside world where we're asking, well, how in our category, how are we unique among our peers? Like think about your organizations. There's a lot that connects you, but many of you are working on something particularly unique. You've found this challenge, there's a gap, and you're filling it. What is that? How are you unique? And then in terms of our cause, how do we define our purpose? What is our purpose as an organization, not as an individual? So now we're making a shift. Each of you are innovators. Each of you are brilliant. Each of you have offered a solution to a very fragmented challenge, right? And you're saying, we want to address this in this way, but how do you define your purpose as an organization? When you collapse category and cause, we get our offering. And so then if you visualize this as a Venn diagram, what's a need in the outside world? What's our offering as an organization? And that's how we get to the positioning statement. So I think once you have your positioning statement in terms of like what your offer is to the world, like you can then tailor your messaging, but you wouldn't necessarily change your unique offering, right? Like what's unique to the organization, because then you can tailor from there. What you don't want to do is to radically shift depending on your audience, but you can tailor messaging, for example. You can tailor channels in terms of how to reach those individuals. So your tactics may shift, but the core of who your organization is and its offering wouldn't change radically. But that's a really great question. And it starts and ends with audiences, the needs of your audience. What are they thinking? What are they seeing? And they're seeing a lot. What are they feeling? What are they thinking? Thinking, seeing, feeling, and hearing. That's a place where we do some empathetic work to say, okay, let's understand our audience. And we don't have you do it in an abstract way. We say, okay, think of a person. Thinking of Diana, what's going on in her mind? What is she seeing every day on her feed? What is she seeing in her search? What's she hearing from peers? So we do it in a very, very concrete way. I'm going to share quickly an example. I use KIPP Public Schools as an example. As they looked at, well, what is the cultural tension we're trying to relieve? Where there was a point in time where charters positioned themselves as, well, we're going to fix all the problems in the world. And we saw students as lacking in some way, and a shift towards a more asset-based lens of how we think about students as bearing gifts and being full and whole people. Tension. When schools function as a place where students go to escape community, they fail to equip students to bolster community. So the tension after lots and lots of listening to stakeholders, families, students, alumni, educators, was to position school as an escape or like get far, far away from your community is not the answer. So that was a real cultural tension. And then the craving universally, no matter who we talk to, was unobstructed opportunity. Again, everyone wanting to advance a world that's more equitable, more just, and recognizing that we're not yet there. And then the category, which I think is really important, how are we unique? We're a network of high-performing public schools, deeply embedded in community, where potential too often exceeds opportunity. And so we're like-minded in the sense that you're thinking very much about what's possible. It's a hopeless optimist in the room, right? What is possible versus what is not. And so as you think about your framing, feel free to lean into your positioning statement around possibility versus what is lacking. right, what's our purpose? To ignite a love of self and community that inspires our students to nurture both. So intentionally, not around sparking, intentionally not around us offering students, right, that inspiration, but that they have it inside, and that our job is to facilitate that. Okay, offering. A national network of high-performing schools equipping students to create the future they want for themselves and others. Again, I know agency is core to all of the work that we do, and so that's really important. What young people want for themselves and others, think a through line there. And then to the audience point and the question that was asked about, well, how do we think about our audience? We're collapsing that not just in terms of what an individual audience member needs, a young person, a family member, a policymaker. We're collapsing that to say they share a mindset. So for those seeking to translate educational opportunity into power, so again, we're not listing policymaker, educator, advocate. We're collapsing that into a shared mindset. KIPP is a national network of high-performing schools that equips students to create the future they want for themselves and others. So again, as you think about your audiences, try to see what they have in common to bring them together to simplify it versus, again, a laundry list. So when we think about the collapsing the audience and the need, which part's the offering, but the first part before the comma, that's the audience piece. And then the offer, right, the offer is KIPP is the national network of high-performing public schools, right, that equips students to create the future they want for themselves and others, because again, the need is a way to translate individual opportunity into community strength. And so creating the future they want for themselves and others beyond the individual is what we try to capture there. But any volunteers that want to walk us through your 4Cs chart?
So when I think of a value proposition, I think of like the artifact. So like a one-pager sent to sort of like a funder, you know, I think, so the consumer part is, you know, it's the parents of our youth, it's the school districts, you know, like the singular consumer, you know, like that one, you know, like that's where I'm getting tripped at, you know, thinking about like what, I'm just used to framing things for a particular audience in mind and not just the whole.
Yeah,
you know,
so that is such a great point. So one, your positioning statement is internal, and then it will then direct the rest of the things that you do. So when you do the one pager, you do the press release, you work on the tweet, you work on the annual report, you're not relitigating and what's our core, what's our ethos, why are we here, right? Because this is going to be the North Star that then guides everything that we do from there. So we don't spend quality time, very limited resources, including our time and brain power, to make a decision every single time. So this positioning statement is internal, and it really is our North Star, so we are super clear about who we are. Because the last thing we want to do is to swing every time we have a different audience member in front of us.
As a part of this, like, I feel like sometimes we're so close to it. Would you say, I'm just thinking, like, it could be interesting to pull some of our teams, some of our school partners, like, what most resonates with you about X, to help shape that? Do you think that's like too much work to do?
Yeah.
Or do you think that's
So that's such a great question. Every single time we do this, we talk to stakeholders because we have a clear view of our hopes, dreams, aspirations for our individual organizations. And sometimes there's a delta in terms of how others view us. Or there is an offering that is singular and unique that we didn't even think about. Like, some of you have been doing a lot of work in social connection and may not have named it as a central offering because it, may not have felt core, but it is indeed core, right? But you can only hear that when you listen to others and hear from them, like, what makes our organization special? What keeps you engaged? What keeps you going? Why did you invest, right? So you talk to donors, like, what about our story made you invest in us? Right? For a young person who is engaged, what about our organization keeps you, and you'll hear from them, and that also helps you to populate the chart. So listen to your stakeholders as you design this as well. Yes?
How often too would you iterate on this, or would you edit it kind of to that point? Like I'm thinking of that cultural, the tension spot, and that being something that seems like it could shift too, depending on what's going on in the culture, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the culture can shift,
Yeah.
right, over time. And just thinking about a movement like marriage equality,
Yeah.
there was a point in time where that cultural tension looked very, very different than it is today. Everyone got moved by the premise that you should marry the person you choose, right? So then we stripped away all of the legal stuff, and then we got to the core of the matter. Now there's a movement around how do we protect trans youth, right? So then the culture is shifting, and then our priorities may shift as an organization. But I would say a significant evolution or change needs to happen in our offering, outlook, strategy that then would have us kind of relitigate this and open it up again. But it is really important to think about what's happening in the outside world, how we can be responsive, or what are our partners doing so that we can point to others who are doing work to relieve that particular tension. What is storytelling? At the core, it's the currency of human life, right? It is what connects us as beings. Separate from other species is our ability to create and share meaning together, which is what we did in so many of the opportunities to connect today. The story of our name, what is the invisible part of our lives that has helped to shape our worldview, how we move in the world, how we shape and define our passion. So creating and sharing meaning is at the heart of storytelling. It's become a buzzword. And so when we hear storytelling, it's like, oh, is it trash? Is it treasure? And so we've got to break out of the world of there's a lot of noise. And then how do we make our stories worth the read, worth the watch, right? And how do we engage our stakeholders to take the action that's necessary to move the needle on the issues that are important to our organizations? And to our communities, for those we have the opportunity to work alongside. All stories are content, but not all content is a story, right? Content's good. Nothing's wrong with content, but not every piece of content is a story. So it's really important to think about a story as having some essential elements, right? Stories create emotion, they drive action, really critical in our work, right? We want to move the needle. Right? And they shouldn't just be pretty, and they shouldn't just die in their beauty. They take investment of time and resources to create and to share. So not just to create, but to make sure that it lives in the world among the stakeholders that are important, again, to our movement. So what are the purpose of stories, and how do they relate to your work? Really important question to ask before you commission a videographer to tell a story about your work or your issue. It's like, what is the core purpose of this story? An important question to ask and answer. So strategy first, creative later. And so think about it. You've heard about ecosystems quite a bit in our social impact work, but it also is an important lens to think about storytelling as well. So different styles, sizes, types of stories, a lot of different purposes, so really being clear about that at the outset, critical. How do we shift from the story of me as a founder, the story of me as an innovator, and the story of our organization, right? So what's currently out there about your work? Really important to do an assessment, what's out there, right? And then thinking about characterizing what the narratives are. And it can be about your issue as well when we think about, are there positive stories that advance your work or negative ones? You mentioned earlier deficit framings around the work around sickness versus wellness and flourishing. So what are some negative framings or narratives out there about the work that you're advancing? And then I think this is really important where the opportunity lies. What story you wish were told? What's missing? What's missing in this noisy world where we're inundated with so much information? What's missing? What does storytelling 2.0 look for your organization? And don't think that everything needs to be digital. Some of it can be analog. Some of it could be a testimonial that you can share with a stakeholder. So not everything isn't digital. It can be analog. That's welcomed. But I think these are some really strategic questions to explore as you're thinking about storytelling 1.0 or storytelling 2.0. Any reflections on those questions? Current, Tricia has a gem of a question, so I'm happy to share that with everybody.
Yeah, definitely the missing narratives and stories. This is something, since leading this organization, this is something I've been working with the team on a lot. Just broad storytelling. We've historically have heard, everybody on the team is like, they're really smart and engaging 20-somethings. For the longest time, it has been, we've heard on the side of caution when it comes to sharing our youth stories because they are queer and trans Black youth. Because, you know, we've seen those icky stories where they tokenize them or, you know. And so it makes me think of like those missing stories and narratives. Like we've built in sort of like every piece of artwork, every, you know, anytime there's a video, they get a stipend for it, you know, so like that helps with the, you know, that ink factor, you know, and so it makes me think about like, we're starting now to have really great storytelling and videos and things like that. It makes me think about, we're turning 30 next year. It makes me think about like what has been lost in that 30 years because of what we've done strategy-wise in terms of like, you know, not capturing a lot of those stories.
Very sobering, and I think the strategy was around how do we protect young people, so that makes a lot of sense. A couple of thoughts. One, I think really important as you think about your storytelling to offer kind of stipends, right? We can never pay someone for their story, but certainly compensate them for their time and honor them in that way to the extent that we can, so that it's not framed in ways that are harmful. First person stories are always better than any mediated story, so someone can share their story in their own words. So I think that would be a powerful way to empower and to really tap into the power, not empower, but tap into the power of those young people. So really, really important. And then the question that Tricia had that I think really lends itself well to what you're asking and what you're framing is this idea of the stories we tell versus the stories told by others. Right, let's just say our own channel or website or social. We have full control over those, and you want to do those ethically. As a team, you have to think about what are your core values around how we tell stories in ways that honor others. And then when you partner with a media entity to tell the story, that needs to be done in a thoughtful way and making sure that you partner with the right journalists, with the right objectives who clearly understand what your value systems are around how this issue is framed. Not every opportunity is one that's worth pursuing. It's really thinking about who's the right partner, who has a track record of really honoring or is open, right, to making sure that no one is harmed in the process. That's really important. And a litmus test I often use in our work is, if I were to read the story about myself, like, would I feel a sense of pride or shame, right? So that's a really good internal, we could give you all kinds of strategies, but that's a really good internal metric of like, does that feel good? Would I feel icky if that were about me? So really try to think about, not to make it about ourselves, but that lens is really, really important. Other thoughts or reactions around opportunity?
Yeah. Are there any best practices or just insights you've seen around storytelling with minors? Like we're talking about teens here, age 10 to 19, and like to Dom's point, we don't want to be tokenizing them. And the best way to communicate the value of what everyone's doing is by showing the, you know, in practice what's happening.
For young people, particularly those who are not at the age of 18, I obviously think parents and families are really important to that. And to the extent that we can use forms that are protective depending on the nature of the story, that doesn't use faces, or if we're going to display something online, could we use other art forms that are protective, but again, making sure that we have consent, that it is a first-person narrative, that they're very, very clear about what we're asking them to do. There's an opportunity to review said content after editing or any manipulation on our part, and the ability to change their minds.
I guess like my question to you is, how do you like, and maybe very tactically, like when speaking with an editor out of the gate, kind of set those boundaries or like say like, hey, this is what I stand for. And like, if you're writing an article about this, I don't. Like, how do you do that in a polite way while also being able to exit?
And I'll just quickly piggyback rather than, because my question's related. On that note, like 100% empathize with that frustration and also felt like it's so hard to, because of that focus on the headline, to communicate nuance when you're trying to tell a story. And that's kind of what I was asking, that question of like the stories you tell versus the stories they tell. My story is very nuanced. And then the story that comes like on the other end is often less nuanced than I want it to be. And it's like, I don't have control, but like, so like, how do you create power in deciding like how to bring that nuance into the story and how it's portrayed?
I just want to add to that. The field, I think, needs to be able to balance between, oh, this is really nice that you're connecting people, to that it's really impactful.
Yeah.
It's not just the joy of what we are doing, all of us,
Yeah.
but it is the deep meaning that each individual can get out of this. And balancing that in a story is art.
That's one lever. The one lever is the reporter who we don't have a lot of control, but we certainly, Oriana, Stephen, our entire team spends a lot of time scouring, like, who's the right person that we want to engage. Sadly, the reporter with whom we've developed a relationship with over the life cycle of doing the story from the pitch to the completion, sadly doesn't write the headline, so that's a reality the editor does. Something that's really important, especially when you're doing narrative shift work, is underwriting reporting with reporters who have a passion and interest in our work, who we can educate along the way. So this is done with a level of care that's critical to the work. There are other strategies we can use, so we don't just lay powerlessly around like, oh, it's not in our control. The last question I'll leave you with, and that you can ponder, and we'll talk more, Luke, is what story are you inspired to tell next? Is what I invite you to take out of the room this afternoon or this morning after 2 days together of talking and sharing and really what you've been mulling over. What can we tell next together? How do we shift the narrative as a collective around digital well-being? And how do we frame the digital wilderness as something that we can navigate together? Thanks, everybody.